I'm so excited to have a very special guest on the show today because if you want to really talk life reboots and what that all means, I think she is a perfect person to come on here and show us all what survival of the fittest truly means and how we can take our message and we can take our survival and put that light into the world to help other people thrive. So welcome, Lori. If you would please introduce yourself and tell us what you do in the world so we get to know you a little bit.
Great. Thank you so much, Linda. I'm so happy to be here and to spend time with you and have this beautiful exchange. I find that exchanging is our best way to feel and heal. I love the virtual support group that's happening all over the world. So, yeah, a little bit about me. I've been a trauma-informed body worker for 20 years. I've now started moving into the online platform. So I'm also a podcast host of the Raw and Wild Hearts. I'm an online consultant and hypnotherapist. I'm a childbirth educator. I'm a pelvic floor therapist. And really, I'm just like a holistic soul care support for people. And I'm here to cheerlead for your divinity in this human life, quite honestly.
I love more than anything the soul care support concept because, as we talked about, Lori and I have met before, and I believe that soul is the one thing that gets left out in our upbringing. We have religion and we have academia, and we're not really getting answers for the challenges our soul confronts in this lifetime. So thank you for all that you do and all that you are. Now, I am sure that you weren't a little girl dreaming of doing all this soul care support. So I am willing to bet there's a story behind it, as there usually is. So let's back up a little bit and let's start at the beginning and tell us how your journey of the soul began.
Well, it is interesting that you say that because honestly, like I came into this world believing in our divinity. That's the guiding light that has gotten me through the wounding upon wounding upon wounding of human experience that I've been through. So I do believe I came in a very soulful way for the world. And honestly, I was placed in so many different environments that kept me in my human form. There are so many times I could have left and went back to my true soul experience, but I was adopted into a family where my parents literally, I know now, were placed there to keep me here as a human in this world to help affect change and create a light in the world from my wounding. And I've always been drawn to healthcare, and I think that's why. When I was very young, I started with I don't even remember what it's called, a CNA, a certified nurse's assistant, where I worked in a rest home, and then I became an EMT, and then I went to college and got my BA in psychology because I wanted to work with adopted kids because I had been through such a wounding and abandonment from my experience through that process, which we might get into later, we'll see. And then I got very spiritual when I went out on my own because I was so curious about the world and about religion. I was raised Catholic, but it just never spoke to my frequency. And so I went out and explored everything that I could. And through that exploration, I really honed into my soul experience, and that was really my religion. And so I became a body worker. I found John Barnes' myofascial release, which is the most incredible way to access your divinity through release of trauma from the body, emotional and or physical trauma from the cells. And seeing that, I was like, I'm home. It was like, that's it. That's after I started my career there. I took a turn into some very, very, very dark, deep, wounding days for years. And I think that because I had the guiding light of knowing the divinity that we have within ourselves and knowing how we can access that on such a beautiful plane, that kept me on a lifeline to eventually get back to it. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. It does make sense. I really, trauma is a word that we don't really look at enough. Trauma is one of those things that people, especially people who are productive or people who are like kind of trying to be badasses in the world, feel like, I've dealt with it. It's in the past. Let bygones be bygones. Like, movers and shakers just keep plowing through. And although I do believe, like, you extract the lessons from trauma, from challenge, from obstacles, and you move forward, it does live in the cells. It does take its home and reside within you if it's left unattended. So I appreciate what you're saying, because it's time for people to really, make trauma not such a bad word, because it can trauma. Trauma that's looked at face to face and confronted turns into healing.
I'm going to say something right now that might shock your ears. Trauma's not special. So when I say that, I had someone say that to me about grief, and it shook me to my core. So I'm not going to own that statement, but I feel like it's such a powerful statement to say, because if you are in this human experience, you will encounter trauma. Even through lifetimes, through intergenerational trauma, through your ancestors, we are not linear, we are infinite. Yep. And we continue on through our cells and our DNA, and our cells were formed through our mothers, through their mothers, it keeps getting passed down. And so we've been in this very linear, control-based culture that told us that trauma was fearful, and that emotions were to hide if you wanted to be successful. So we don't know what we don't know. And if that's what we were raised in, then of course that's how we're going to think that we're thriving. Well, that's not how humans are made to thrive. We are these beautiful, dimensional, dynamic beings that are an accumulation of our ancestors, of ourselves, of ourselves, and of ourselves. And so we are divine souls within a human body and human experience. And when we can bring those two together, which is ultimately the balancing of our masculine and feminine energies within ourselves, it's a beautiful place of unconditional love and detached ego, where we are, right? And so our emotions there's no judgment on what emotion may be coming up. It just is, and we are with it, and it leaves the body. But when we attach really, really deep stories to it, which there usually are really, really deep stories to it, it actually gives it this place of like solitude within the body, right? And we start to hold on to it, and sometimes we become our trauma because it gets very comfortable, right? And then
that's what you're used to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That becomes comfortable, but bringing it up is so much more scary to us than keeping it inside. When we keep it inside, that creates dis-ease. It creates health, pain symptoms. It can create so much dysfunction and unbalance, and even lower karmic vibrations and loops that we stay in, and we keep attracting it to us because we're holding on to it so tightly, instead of realizing that we're so magical and special with what we can do, that when we release, it releases, and we move into our higher consciousness and higher selves.
That's like literally what I feel is this, I'm proud to say that I'm like, my kids are growing up in a world where this is like now talked about and discussed, because this kind of language and vocabulary is nothing I heard as a child, or really as a young adult, like in my 20s. And it wasn't until my 40s that this language of consciousness and of awareness and of trauma and of healing and of all that language, became available to me. And it really shifted and pivoted my perspective of what life meant, of what life was, of what my capacity was and my power. What I had available to me changed when I shifted my words, when I shifted my beliefs, and language is such a big part of that. So I want to dive into the essence of your message. Like, I want to dive into how Lori developed all this knowledge, wisdom, and awareness in her own life so that she can project it out into the world. So talk to me about more of your journey. Take us a little deeper.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the most pivotal moments that accumulated into years of my life was when my daughter was stillborn. It really started with my abandonment wound from my adoption process and experience, but when my daughter was stillborn at 30 years old, that pretty much ripped any kind of Band-Aid that may have been on that wound off and took me into a very, very dark, deep spiral of trauma and wounding for the next, I would say 10 to 14 years. And as you can imagine, for anyone, losing a child in that capacity is devastating. But then for me, adding in the factor of that being my only biological connection, really, because I didn't grow up with a biological connection, there was a lot of deep, intergenerational wounding in that aspect as well, because I was so excited to experience that. Because when you grow up not having anyone that looks like you or laughs like you or really relates on that very cellular biological level, it's different. And like I said, what we don't know, we don't know. And I had a wonderful childhood. Like I said, my parents were placed in my life for a very specific reason. They were miracles to me, and I'm still here because of them. I adore them. And we can be two things. And I still had this very deep wounding experience from the abandonment that I went through as a baby. So when my daughter died, my body told me that I was abandoning her. So it was like recreating that wound in a whole different way. And then came the spiral, like I said, of wounding upon wounding. My husband and I grieved in a very different way. I was in a small town. It was very tragic, how I had to bring her into the world. But now, and this is where the energies that are coming online now are giving us such a beautiful perspective of why our life has unfolded in the way that it has. And that has to do with those energies balancing and shifting. And we can actually be present with all of the moments of our life instead of seeing them as a lack of or, a disappointment in. Now we see every one of those moments brought us to where we are now in our sovereignty and in our magic and in our power. So, over the next years, I experienced a very difficult separation in one of my true loves in my marriage. And we had a subsequent loss. We miscarried another baby. And my health just tanked because of the genetic condition that they believe is why my daughter passed and why I had the next miscarriage. And so I was the unhealthiest I'd ever been. Nobody could figure out what was wrong with me. I was having test upon test. I was hemorrhaging money, trying to figure out why this happened, what was going on, why I couldn't breathe, why my skin was changing. And I was in a small town that just couldn't help. And I was getting re-triggered over and over from the environment while my relationship was in such a degree of separation because of our own individual experiences with such loss and such pain, that I ultimately made the decision to remove myself to try to climb back into life and find my divinity again and believe that I could smile again someday. But that loss, I was a shell of a person for years.
Well, how could you not be? And I really, really appreciate, I appreciate you, but I appreciate just how much you're bringing to light, and I was not adopted, but your connection to that biological piece that was missing in your childhood to losing what you were then able to create biologically is very powerful, because talk about trauma and talk about wounds, and I love when you said ripping the Band-Aid off anything that might have been keeping the thing together just was exposed. But in hearing stories like this, unfortunately, it's the exposure of the wound that heals, right? It's like there's no choice but to get all the stuff out, wow, it's just powerful. All right, keep telling me. I want to know more.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. At the time, I would have shut you down immediately because it was so painful to be living that experience. But yet something drove me to stay. I was driven to stay in this world while, my great love, my daughter, was in the spirit world. And so I went to create a whole new life, and it was the hardest thing that I've ever done, and it took years. And it's nice now that it's even difficult for me to remember the pain and the stress, and the financial stress, the medical stress, the heartbreak from my children and from one of my marriage and one of the loves of my life, creating a whole new environment in a geographical location, starting a new business again so that I could pay my medical bills, so I could figure out what was wrong with me. So really what I did, this is quite in Lori fashion, is I dove into the thing that hurt the most. And I decided to start working with women that had been through loss themselves and were trying to have subsequent pregnancies and living children. And because I had already been a trauma-informed body worker, and I just started gravitating toward that because I literally could not be around children. I couldn't be around families. I couldn't be around my friends that had children. It was, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it was there, and again, forgive me for anything I am naive to in my questions, because I'm living this experience through you, not personally. So there's a lot I'm willing to admit I don't know, but I would imagine that support from, I always think like to like it takes someone who's been through that experience to really connect the grief with someone who's going through it, because you don't, did you find that there were people who weren't tapping into your grief because the child hadn't been born yet? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
Oh, absolutely.
Because there's a naivete to especially if you're not a woman who's carrying this child. Right. It's your baby.
That's where it was hard for my husband to even understand the depth of my grief, right? Because he didn't understand the experience in my body, but he also didn't experience the wounding that had been that was a part of this as well, that was going on for maybe even generations.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh no, 95% of the people were in that category. And that's what makes it's a silent subculture. And that's why I'm so happy to talk about it now, because I can relate to your depth of grief. And that's why I started working with women. I had no fear of their pain, and I could acknowledge it, and I could be present in it. And I didn't have to give shitty one-liners. I didn't have to say something that would make me feel better because I was uncomfortable in their grief. I could just sit with them and be in it and cry with them. Quite honestly, I was still in a well of my own grief for various reasons. And so diving into that was the first step towards becoming community-based again, because I had to control my community so intensely in order to just live. And so being able to be around babies and pregnant women and helping them get pregnant was a way for me to work with people who had understood what I was going through, but also work with mothers and babies. And over time, it got easier, and I became prouder and prouder of what I was doing. And then eventually, especially, I couldn't even believe I started working with newborns, but as
you healed, right?
Yeah, I'm a newborn whisperer. Like, for some reason, I can put my hands on a newborn baby, do craniosacral and that myofascial release, and help them in a way that the medical system cannot. Help them with breastfeeding, with sleeping, with their GI tract. Like, there's so many things that I could do.
I'm overwhelmed with all the things I want to talk about because, like I said, sometimes when we hear somebody's experience, we can tap into what parts of it have resonance for us. And so just being a mom right away, there's this deep connection. But I believe that up until now, women have had this role to play in society of like not being super honest with what ails us as a feminine divine energy. So the problems of motherhood come with a lot of shame and guilt up until now, and grieving certain things were like a no, you have to just keep it to yourself and hush hush. I know, for example, in my personal life, I really had trouble breastfeeding my daughter, and I had people come to my house and try and help me, but there was so much resistance on my part because I was ashamed of what my body was and in my perception, it's like, I'm built for this. Women do it all the time. I must be broken in some way if I can't nourish my baby the way I'm supposed to. Those actual words never came out of my mouth because I was too ashamed to even admit it. So I went to the default of like, yeah, I'm bottle feeding because that's what I choose and you can't tell me that it's a bad decision. It was like defense, because our truth has been subdued for so long that we are not comfortable stepping into the honesty of all the facets of motherhood, womanhood, femininity. So I'm absolutely charmed and elated and like empowered by you, because I love when you said silent subculture, and yay for you being the voice of the voiceless. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I just want to touch on breastfeeding for a second, because it becomes a cyclical trauma at that point. And this is what our wounded, quite honestly, we've been in a wounded masculine culture for centuries. And that's shifting. The sacred masculine is beautiful, right? It's confidence, it's strength, it's moving forward. But what we have to remember is it's the container for the divine feminine of our intuition, feeling our feelings, honoring our feelings. And when we do that, they move through us, the energy flows. And when we can come out with that in confidence, we actually increase our innate and intuitive wisdom, our innate medical wisdom. Like there is so much that we are for ourselves, and this is our sovereignty that we can do for ourselves, that we were giving our power away because we didn't know anything else. Our systems were created to control us in a way, and no blame here, no judgment, but like our medical system, they'll take care of it. So we didn't ever get fostered in the fact that it is our innate medical wisdom that is first and foremost. And sometimes we need help. That's the beauty of science. It's the beauty of medicine. I'm so grateful that there are people that want to study that and want to be involved in that. But it should never be our first thought. We should always be looking within because our bodies tell us what we need. But that part of us has been shut down for so long because we've been in such a fast-paced, linear, controlled culture. And when you're in a competition-driven culture, you don't have time to open up to that, right? And when it's a linear school system, you get blinders, and that imagination and that expansion gets shut down. And that's what we learned to do with our whole lives. So trauma, we shut it down.
Box.
Our intuition, we shut it down because someone, and this is what's called a prestige suggestion. So if someone suggests something to you in a medical, I'm going to give the example of in a medical environment, we consider that to be the ultimate knowledge. And so anything that we tell ourselves or anyone else tells us to the contrary will never top the prestige suggestion, because we've been told that they are the be all and end all. We've been told that they have the supreme knowledge. We haven't been told and supported in our own supreme knowledge over that, because it's always us first. I went off on a really big tangent there. I meant to say about breastfeeding.
That's okay. It's all worthy.
When we honor every feeling that comes up, and honestly, when we shift a sensationalism culture, our culture is so ageist and sensationalist that breastfeeding rates in the US are by far lower than especially European countries, because they have a reverence and love for the body and for birth. And we have a reverence and love for drama and
convenience.
Hollywood. Yeah. And so we don't have a reverence for our breastfeeding and our mother's breastfeeding. So even just taking on that guilt and shame of, our anatomy is used to sell beer, but our anatomy is shameful if we're using it to feed our children, right? So that message from little on becomes a bigger and bigger message. So even that subconscious programming affects the way that women
show up
in the experience of breastfeeding and don't even realize it because it's such a deep subconscious and unconscious programming. And so what I did when I worked with breastfeeding, and I think this is where my success lied, is, we went back to what was innately working for women before we had doctors, hospitals, education. We were our medical institution because we didn't have anything else, right? So we had to listen to ourselves. So I say, forget everything that the system is telling you. What do you feel? Like, how does it feel correct? Right? And so I would have people change their holds, and then also just take off the shame and the pressure. It's okay if you bottle feed. Like, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you're in a space of energetic flow, that you're in a space of love with however this moves for you. And that's a message that our parents do not get. So it's like we're so binary with it, bottle feeding is so bad, but yet don't put your breast out in public because that's so bad, And so women are like, I don't understand.
What am I supposed to do? Yeah, exactly. One of the most beautiful things I witness in this whole reboot process, and is the thing that tries to take you down that trauma or challenge in your life that was the moment of like, I can't breathe. What am I going to do with this? The real true meaning of a reboot is when that turns into your mission and purpose, like for someone that was so touched and affected by the procreation process, by motherhood and childhood and the whole thing. And that is now literally who you serve and how you help. And although it would be beautiful to do it in a space that is not traumatized, at the same time, once you have been through it, because life gave that experience to you, there is nobody better if you're willing to step into that role, to understand and hold space and have compassion for people following in your footsteps and say, I've been there, I've done that, and I know now, and I'm going to help you, and I'm going to come back for you. I'm not just going to leave you in my desk. I'm going to come back for you. That is what makes this mean something to me, and I hope mean something to the world. You went back for the moms who didn't have what you had, and you said, I'm not going to let you experience it the way I did. I'm going to help you have it better. I'm going to help you feel things and experience things that I didn't have a chance to do. You went back for them, and I just want to honor that and tell you that, there's no better gift to give the world. So thank you on behalf of all the moms and children who get Lori.
Yeah. Well, and I have to say, it's not always easy, especially I'm not working one-on-one with people anymore because I've actually gotten more messages and information and understanding as to why all of this happened for me in my life and what my true soul purpose and mission is. And that includes, I will be putting out a digital course on childbirth, and I'm putting out my book finally. So I was told I have to go bigger with this because I continually felt like I'm a great effect for the families that I work with, but it's so small. And if we truly want to change the world, we have to change the way that we birth. We have to change that way that we support our mothers and our families.
It is literally the starting point, Lori.
The thing is, we're bringing babies in fear and stress and trauma. We're traumatizing moms and their intuition and their transcendence in the world. Childbirth, I believe that childbirth and death are two of the most transcendent times you can ever have in this human life. And we are creating
Entrance and exit, yep.
trauma for our mothers and babies in childbirth. And this is something that we can easily shift and change. So this is where I have to go bigger with the message, because I want to affect the masses. And I'll tell you, when you're working one-on-one with families, and I told them things that their medical system wouldn't tell them, because it's not a part of, we don't educate, we basically dominate and control. And a lot of people didn't want to hear it, because it's pretty scary. You know, we're in such a fear-driven place when we're pregnant, because the medical community tells us that everything could go wrong and might go wrong and will go wrong.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
So that's the message that we're constantly getting. So if you hear any other information, it can be so overwhelming for your nervous system that you can't even take that in on top of the system that is creating such a space of fear. If you can imagine, our moms who are walking around pregnant for 9 months are in a state of panic usually, because of the messages they're getting from what we've always considered to be our highest source of wisdom, which is the medical system, but also every message they're getting from TV and from movies and from other
moms. Moms just love to tell everybody, though, you know, and I get it, but at the same time, like, we all need to understand that it is unique to us. There's no blanket statement, you know, but that being said, there is an essence of childbirth. There's an experience of childbirthing that we're missing. And I love this expression of it. I love you saying, like, this is where you come into the world, and it matters. How you come into the world matters. It's not just a medical procedure, you know, it's a birthing of a soul into this consciousness, and all of it matters. And have we paid enough attention to how we handle something so sacred? Have we given it the title of sacred? So these are all questions I feel like you're addressing.
I love those words that you use, because I feel like that actually shifts the way that we feel in our bodies when you say that this is a soul we're birthing into consciousness, and are we viewing it as sacred? Because those words are not used in our birthing system and environment. And if we actually start to feel into those words, it's like, oh wait,
this is a big deal.
Yeah, it's not just a medical event. It's almost like people want to get through it,
yes,
and then move on to the life part. But we don't understand is the epigenetics of everything that surrounds your birth is how your genes express because of the environment around them. And what we scientifically now, if anybody wants to look it up, what we're understanding is everything that happens in your prenatal period, through birth into your postnatal period, is the majority of who you become as an adult. So if we're looking at our trauma and woundings, we can usually trace a lot of it back to that time period, if not back through generations. And then we have this core wounding, and then all of life happens, and we're experiencing life from this core wounding. So then we get all these extra traumas and woundings that are coming from the core. And so when people start to have an aha moment about this, and they're like, oh, I've never heard of epigenetics. What's this about? And if they have the privilege of finding out about their birth, if their mother or their father or anyone is still around to tell them about it, they start putting things together like, oh, that's why I have, you know, I cough a lot, or I choke, you know, something, it could be a forceps that brought them out, or something like that, you know, or a vacuum brings them out, and they have something that happens with cerebrally. But then the emotional trauma and wounding as well, you can create so many connections once you understand that experience. And that's what happened for me as I was continuing with this work and doing the training that I was doing. My whole life unfolded, and I was like, oh, I need to do the most work around my birth experience, and that's going to change my whole life. And let me tell you, Linda, it has everything.
I think this is an untouched, untapped area. I think that you are putting light on a very obscure topic that people are, it's kind of lives in the shadows. And exactly for the reason you just stated, people are like, let's just get this baby out into the world, and then when they're birthed, then life begins. But we're missing a very important piece of the puzzle.
Absolutely.
And I have enjoyed this conversation so much. I hope that all of you are, especially if you're moms and you're watching, if you're pregnant moms watching, we're going to make sure that Lori is reachable. We're going to make sure that you know exactly how to find her and how to be a part of it. But, we all have our own experience, but I believe that the journey of others, I believe that the pain and struggle of others is a gift to those of us they come back for. It's a gift when somebody who has been through it, been there, done that, can say, I'm going to use that wisdom, I'm going to use that resilience and that strength, and I'm going to change this. I'm going to pivot this, and I'm going to make it better for others. And Lori, that's exactly what you've done. So thank you. And we appreciate you watching, and we will look forward to seeing you on the next episode. So thank you, Lori, for being a guest on the show and for sharing your heart, for sharing your story, for sharing your vulnerability and your truth. And I am really honored to witness your light shine onto the world.
Thank you so much, Linda. It's been such a pleasure, and I'm sending so much peace and love to everyone.